now. Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican from Louisiana. It's great to have you back on Bloomberg. Senator, Happy New Year. As you prepare to return to Washington, I wonder your thoughts today, knowing that Mitch McConnell, your leader in the Senate, is set to mark a major milestone here as the longest-serving party leader in Senate history. Play that against what's happening next door. Kevin McCarthy struggling to get enough votes to be the next speaker. What does that tell us about the Republican Party right now and its new majority in the House, from your view?
Well, it's not much of a majority, right? It's got 5 extra people, and if he can't get those 5 or 4 extra people, then he's not the speaker. So it tells you that the American people have voted pretty evenly, where it's 51-49 in the Senate, Democrat to Republican, and it's 4 votes extra for Republicans in the House. The American people are divided. That's reflected in both the House and the Senate right now.
So you project that on the agenda for the new year here, Senator. Both parties like to talk about having a big tent. Could you have too big a tent to get anything done in this divided Congress? We may have lost the senator. Can you hear us, Senator
The only
Cassidy?
way you're going to get something done, and we do need to get things done, is to I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
The only way you'll get things done is if Democrats work together. It takes 60 votes in the Senate, and so Democrats, Republicans. And we've got to get things done. Social Security is going insolvent in 11 years. Medicare in 5. Millions of Americans depend upon those programs. They are going insolvent. It's going to take a divided government, in this case, to solve those. And that's, in my mind, something that we've got to do. So we've got a divided government. Let's go at it.
When you're talking about Social Security, obviously what comes to mind, a lot of Republicans have talked about using Social Security measures as leverage to strike a deal when it comes to the debt ceiling. When you're looking at the havoc that's happening now in the House, does that foreshadow what is potentially going to be a struggle to raise the debt ceiling later this year?
The debt ceiling is a separate issue. If you want to link reform of these programs, that's fine. But it makes it less complicated if we just speak to them. And it's always been said you only achieve Social Security reform in the divided government, whether it is Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich or whether it's Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, because there's too much of a temptation, a demagogue, from one side or the other, if it's only one party doing the reform. So I actually see divided government as the opportunity to strengthen programs Americans agree upon, strengthen them for those who are on it, to preserve it for those who are going to be. If there's a time to do it, let's do it now.
Do you view this moment in time potentially likened to what happened in 2011, where Obama had to strike this deal to cut about $2 trillion over the course of a decade from spending to make sure he was able to get the debt ceiling negotiation through?
Well, clearly, we've got a problem with our debt and deficit. Now, if you look at it, although the kind of what is called discretionary spending, the money for roads and highways, the money for the money for military, that's discretionary. That's actually a small portion of what our debt and deficit is about. Increasingly, our debt is related to Social Security and Medicare. They are going insolvent. And if we don't preserve them, the people that depend upon them will not have that safety net. So if the debt ceiling is part of how we get the courage to take on something important for the American people, maybe it is a debt ceiling. But I think it's easier to consider those separately and the debt ceiling over here by itself. It may end up being tied up, but I think you have to work on them initially, at least, as if they're separate.
We're talking with Senator Bill Cassidy, a Republican from Louisiana. As our viewers and listeners see here and listen to, we've got an eye on the House floor. We're opening prayers, the Pledge of Allegiance taking place, and they're going to move now to the beginnings of this process of electing the next Speaker of the House. Senator, tomorrow, Joe Biden is going to Kentucky to appear with Mitch McConnell to talk about, and a couple of other Democrats and Republicans as well, to talk about the infrastructure law that you helped to broker as one of the 5 original negotiators of the infrastructure bill, now law. They're going to be talking about one of the major projects projects there in Kentucky. But I wonder, when will Americans see cranes and major construction sites, major changes in their communities as this law is implemented and funded this year?
I think you're already starting to see those changes. In my state, for example, there is now broadband internet being brought to rural areas that currently does not have broadband internet. And the contracts have been let, the design is taking place, and within 2 years, those projects will be completed. Now, some things take a little bit extra. There's $150 million extra coming to Lake Charles, Louisiana, to replace a bridge on the Interstate I-10 over the Calcasieu Ship Channel. Well, that money's just coming down, so the bridge work will not begin for a year or so. But some things, I've already mentioned the internet, I can mention other things like water projects are already taking place. But the wonderful thing about the plan is that it will continue to roll out for 5, 6, and 7 years. So yes, it didn't happen like that, but absolutely it's going to continue to roll out. Americans will continue to see that benefit.
Well, it's not lost on us that Joe Biden appears with Mitch McConnell at the beginning of a new divided Congress here, Senator. Is that an example for you all to follow?
We only get something done in a divided Congress if we work together. Now, Republicans are not going to sign off on something which is terrible from the left. We're just not going to do that. But if the president wants to get something done, and we've already mentioned several things like Social Security and Medicare, and he is willing to meet Republicans where we are and work towards common ground, then we can succeed. I would argue it's critical for our country to succeed. We can sit and throw things at each other all day long. Nothing ever happens. Our country doesn't move forward. If President Biden is willing to work with Mitch McConnell and other Republicans, Kevin McCarthy, then I think that the next 2 years can be productive. If we decide just to throw brickbats, nothing's going to happen, that's not good for the country.
Potentially Kevin McCarthy, and you're seeing those pictures now. He potentially is going to be the Speaker of the House. There's a lot of drama around this, which we haven't seen in a century, Senator. Back to Joe's point where he started this whole conversation, the dichotomy you're seeing in the House versus what you're seeing from your leader in the Senate now, record party leader in terms of his time serving. Is the bad PR potentially going to come, though, to the Republican Party writ large, given the chaos that's happening on the House floor?
I think ultimately the American people, most Americans are not following this. Most Americans are rightfully more concerned about a young man who last night in a football game had a cardiac contusion and is now in critical care. If you follow what's trending on Twitter, they're praying for him. Most Americans have a life to live. But they are going to, in that life they're living, look to see if there's results that come out of this Congress, which actually makes their lives materially better. Do we address issues like inflation? Are we able to make energy cheaper? Are jobs more plentiful? Are they higher paying? Medicare and Social Security we referred to. If those are things that Congress contributes to positive outcomes, then Republicans will do quite well. But I don't think as much as you and I are interested in what's happening right now on the live stream, but most Americans are going about their day right there. And that's kind of, as a conservative, I like the fact that people are going about their day.
All right. Thanks to Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy, and Happy New Year to you, too.